I'm sure you're here because you clicked on the very clickbait thumbnail about hot goth androgynes. Unfortunately, this video is not meant to be titillating. You have been fooled, tricked. You even thought I was going to say a third thing because of the rule of threes. I am going to talk to you about literary theory. Of course, androgyny and the Gothic will still be relevant. I don't lie all the time as much as I'd like to, but before we can cover it, we must first explain a key concept of Gothic literature dating back to the genre's inception, that of the abject. The abject refers to the concept of a between space, the void between defined boxes, buckets, and categories. It particularly orients itself as a subject of disgust rather than transcendence. The undead as the vileness between living and dead, the monstrous between human and animal. Particularly important is that one of these categories represents something familiar to ourselves or something about ourselves. Things that are abject should be like us, but not quite. It is, in a way, the cousin of the uncanny, and both are notions that start really appearing in art at a similar time. But when you might think of something uncanny as something new that reminds you of something you've seen before, the abject is something familiar used in a strange new way. The vampire is a person. You've seen people before, I presume, but it breaks rules about what a person is. The rule that the dead are inanimate. A concrete example of something real is blood. Blood is familiar, we all have it, it's part of us. When it's doing what it's supposed to, we like it, but when it's splattered all over a room, it makes us puke. That's because it's between the buckets of part of a person and goop on the ground. It's something we know that appears where it's not meant to be. Now we can talk about Gothic literature, and there is no better place to start than the beginning. The term Gothic itself as a literary genre was coined by Horace Walpole in the subtitle The Castle of Otranto, a fascinating novel filled to the brim with questionable writing decisions and spooky, scary bullshit. More importantly to our discussion, however, is its introduction of stock character archetypes that echo throughout the better books of Gothic literature. There is Manfred, who introduces the cruel patriarch, an oppressive man in a position of great power, whose selfish schemes and machinations drive the narrative's conflict. You'll see it repeated in characters like Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights, Count Dracula, and arguably Victor Frankenstein. They don't have to be somebody's dad, but they're usually somebody's dad. I'll let you think about what this might have to say about Gothic novelists. There is the vulnerable woman who requires saving, usually from the cruel patriarch, but not always, as her most important characteristic is beauty and appeal to the male characters. In Otranto, this is Isabella, and it echoes throughout the Gothic with characters like Dracula's Lucy Westenra, Frankenstein's Elizabeth Lavenza, and Wuthering Heights' Isabella. Yes, there are two Isabellas. Don't worry about it. Most importantly to us, however, is the wilting flower, and to really get into what makes it what it is, we have to talk about the character with whom it starts, Manfred's son, Conrad. We learn very little about Conrad as he dies 3 paragraphs into the novel. This fact itself is one of the most defining features of the archetype. They suffer a miserable death, and that the narrative doesn't expect you to feel all too bad about that. By the time Conrad dies, the only things we know about him are that he's 15 years old, he's engaged to Isabella, he's remarkably sickly, and that he's ugly. It may seem like this gives us very little to go off of, but because of that, it breaks the archetype down into its most crucial component parts. Let's talk about them one by one. We've already mentioned the notion that characters in this role die horribly, and nobody really cares. Conrad, particularly, is crushed by a giant helmet that falls out of the sky, and his father, Manfred, responds as any father would to seeing his son die, celebrating that this gives him an excuse to get with his son's fiancée. No, really, that's what happens. He tracks her down and says, quote, "Conrad was not worthy of your beauty. You have missed a husband undeserving of your charms. Instead of a sickly boy, you shall have a husband in the prime of his age, who will know how to value your beauties, and who may expect a numerous offspring." Manfred's married, by the way, and like 60 or something. I skipped the part where he says, "I don't give a shit that I have a wife," but he does say that. Isabella's not all too broken up about this either. She's upset by the notion of marrying Manfred, of course, but relieved not to have to marry Conrad. This brings us then to the notion of Conrad's undesirability, or particularly the flower part of wilting flower. While Manfred's affections are portrayed as distinctly predatory, his words about Conrad are only ever justified by the text. The notion that Isabella deserves a real man rather than a boy like Conrad is enforced by the narrative when she swiftly falls in love with Theodore, a dashingly handsome peasant who's a secret noble and a master swordsman and a brilliant orator and philosopher and everything else. He's an awful character, but if I complain more about it, we'll get off track from the video. It will suffice to say that Conrad is part of a complex love triangle involving men far more physically able and traditionally masculine than he is, and he is not the one ultimately chosen. It checks off boxes of romantic involvement and undesirability, as well as being doomed by the narrative as elements of the character, and these are all pretty constant across the archetype. Sometimes they'll get away with horrible trauma and almost dying, they'll get sent to a farm upstate, but we'll talk about that when we get there. The other features of the archetype we see in Conrad are sickliness and youth. Conrad's sickliness and frail constitution serve the important purpose of rendering him less than the story's other male characters. It is what Manfred cites as the source of his unworthiness as a lover, and is distinctly used to define him as less of a man. His youth, similarly, is used as a tool for the plot to emasculate him. He is a boy as compared to Manfred. If you think that's on the nose for naming, you haven't seen shit yet in Gothic novels, buddy. They both contribute to the more important aspect of the archetype, that he is specifically undesirable because he is not as much of a man as the others in the love triangle. Now that we've defined what makes the wilting flower what it is, it's time to give some examples. So I'm not making all this shit up because of one guy in Toronto who shows up for less than a page. Let's talk about the guy who inspired the whole video, Gulchenrouz from Gothic. Now, Gothic is a lot to talk about, but suffice it to say that it marries the role of cruel patriarch and protagonist into a single racist stereotype in the titular Caliph Gothic. While Gothic is gallivanting around doing the good work of his lord Satan, sacrificing kids and shit, he stumbles into a small little town in which there lives a hot girl named Neronahar. I think I'm saying that right. Gothic is very into this girl, but unfortunately she is engaged to, believe it or not, an effeminate young boy by the name of Gulchenrouz. Now when I say effeminate, I don't mean implicitly coded as less manly in the way Conrad was. No, I mean the novel says, and I quote, "When Gulchenrouz appeared in the dress of his cousin, he seemed to be more feminine than even herself." Oh, right, Gulchenrouz and Neronahar are cousins. Bazinga! More to the point, he is directly, explicitly stated as looking exactly like an extremely beautiful woman if he is to cross-dress. Bluntly, Big Gulch is the spitting image of the modern anime femboy, complete with being a white guy's imagined version of what an Asian man looks like. How gender is racialized in Gothic novels is a topic for another video, so we're not going to go into it right now. So forget about it. This aspect of femininity is further reinforced by the details that he lives with the women in the harem even as an adult. He's remarkably in tune with his emotions, not particularly courageous, and he has a deep passion for art, music, and poetry. He also gets his ass handed to him by Gothic's goons, similarly giving us an aspect of inferior physicality to the other male characters, and he uses that magic medicine Asian people have that lets you look dead from Count of Monte Cristo. I have no idea where that trope came from. It is just a thing. To fucking deal with it. So he has a part where he gets to be really sickly too. We're 3 for 5 on wilting flower aspects here, but you probably noticed from the quotes on screen that he's in a pretty loving relationship with Neronahar. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you're listening to this in the background while you do something else, which is fine. I would rather be painting the Twin Lands right now if I could. I've been here for 4 hours setting up a camera. But worry not, friend, for you see, Gothic swoops in and says, quote, "Would you surrender this divine beauty to a husband more womanish than herself? And can you imagine that I will suffer her charms to decay in hands so inefficient and nerveless?" And then sweeps Neronahar off her feet, easily convincing her to forget Gulchenrouz and get with a real man. Again, this concept of femininity being undesirable in a man in a love triangle crops up in the story, and again, Gothic makes these themes far less subtle. Just like it makes racism far less subtle. Oh, and as for the dying part, Gothic sacrifices him to Satan. I mean, technically he gets scooped up by a friendly genie who flies him away to live in Neverland Ranch in the sky, which is with a bunch of other effeminate boys and a kind older man, who live in paradisical harmony forever where they never grow up. But everyone thinks he's dead. Neronahar is like, "Oh man, I can't believe I sacrificed Gulchenrouz to Satan. He is very dead now." It's basically, he went to a farm upstate. He's not dead. It's pretty much just that way because Gothic didn't want to show a Muslim character going to heaven. And also, Beckford's idea of a happy ending is one where a cool guy gets to molest a bunch of kids forever and not get in trouble for it because he got kicked out of England for having an affair with a 16-year-old, and it was long running by the time that child was 16. You can look that up. That's real. That's real. So anyway, speaking of tonal whiplash, let's talk about Wuthering Heights. Maybe you saw the movie. Maybe you didn't. I didn't. Wuthering Heights is so virulently racist in its themes that it does not warrant watching an adaptation which will surely be either just as racist as the original or miss everything that made Wuthering Heights Wuthering Heights. There is a secret third option where you make Caliban but Heathcliff, but I don't think that's what the White Heathcliff movie is. Actually, let me look that up real quick. Are you fucking serious? That has to be its own video. I'm not doing this right now. Okay. Linton is Heathcliff and Isabella's son. If you've only seen the movie, you don't know that. There are lots of things you don't know about this book if you've only seen the movie. Okay, so let's talk about Linton as the wilting flower. First of all, the first time he appears as a novel, he's described as a pale, delicate, effeminate boy. So write that down. He's very specifically noted as being feminine and very heavily contrasted with his rival in love, Hareton, who's a rowdy boy's boy who likes hunting and causing mischief. While Linton seems charming and sweet on the surface, he becomes the same sort of domestic abuser as his father after they're married, whereas Hareton starts off gruff and becomes increasingly tender as their relationship advances. Again, anime tropes, but before. It positions Linton as a sort of skulking monster, like a Venus flytrap waiting to bite whatever gets too close. At the same time, there's aspects of Linton that vary the more virtuous Gilchin-Roos. Namely, Kathy still likes him after everything. She takes care of him when he's on his deathbed, and can never really bring herself to hate him, even when she winds up liking the manly man far better. I guess I just alluded it, but now's a good time to mention that Linton's really sickly, bedridden most of the time. This condition, combined with Kathy's affection, is used by Heathcliff to lure Kathy into Wuthering Heights to kidnap her. Again, the sickliness serves as a way of making Linton a sort of bewildered hook. Also, he dies. So Linton, too, is effeminate, undesirable as compared to a manlier man, sickly in a romantic relationship with a female lead, dies and is young. By the way, he's 17. I thought he was 13, I had to go back and check. Whatever. Again, we have a 5 for 5 on the wilting flower archetype. Now it's time to bring it home. We've got this notion of the abject, and we've got the notion of effeminate men in the Gothic. How do we connect them? Well, what is gender nonconformity if not a form of abjection? Conrad, Gilchin-Roos, Linton, they are all this familiar notion of a man, invoked in a way that makes it feel strange and unfamiliar. It, as abjection does, attacks our sense of defined categories. Not quite a man, but not a woman either. These characters, too, appear in a sort of between space. I suppose now is a good time to reveal the secret mouse-catrool I've been hiding. That sickness is typically considered a form of abjection, a blurring of the boundaries between living and dead. This sickliness being associated with the unmasculine ties both of them together with the abject. These characters are fully embedded into between space. Now I realize you're probably thinking, isn't the abject supposed to invoke horror? Feminine men don't seem very scary to me. I mean, look at you, who is so cool, attractive, and awesome looking. I'm not scared of that in a meaningful way. To which I say, thank you, but you must attempt to enter the headspace of a reactionary in the 17 or 1800s. In this context, the idea of someone like me is some spooky shit, dawg! It creates confusing feelings. These characters are both eroticized, treated as attractive, and as something deeply horrific. That eroticization is also a trait the abject has a lot. Go watch any movie about vampires for more information. Gully and the boys create a horror through gender abjection in which they threaten the very concept of the gender binary, disturbing the rules-based order in the minds of the reader. The insistence that they must suffer, die, have their lover saved from their insidious clutches grants the catharsis to the male reader, and that the type of man that they view as a true manly man is the top dog who can vanquish the threat posed by the effeminate man. Hey, wait a minute. You see that? There's a bunch more runtime in this video. Is there another gender that also fits in the concept of a gender binary that can be abjected also? Well, maybe. See, gender abjection with regards to femininity is a more complex subject. And frankly, while I'm qualified to talk about vague Asian men who dress in women's clothes, I'm not fit to talk about white women. Give me a second. Hey, you're a white woman, right? I need you to come talk about something. I need you to come talk about Mina Harker. Yeah. Okay.
let's talk about Mina Harker. Mina is one of the main protagonists of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the only woman in the main cast of characters. Mina is, in a word, perfect. She is depicted throughout Dracula as a shining star, a real standard for others to look up to. The fascinating part of this is that Mina is a woman with a lot of masculine traits. It begs the question, is it gender nonconformity that's looked at upon, or is it femininity? Could it be something else? Both? To list all of Mina's positive traits would take more time than I have. However, a few of these traits stand out when thinking about her through the lens of gender presentation and performance. She is very hardworking, especially when it comes to the service of her husband. One example of this is her desire to learn stenography in the name of, quote, being useful to Jonathan. This is an important element of femininity under the patriarchy, but in Mina's case it's a little bit different. She is competent in ways that mean she is often occupying the role a man would in a more traditional story. She spends much of the novel helping hunt for Dracula, including things like confronting the unstable, possibly dangerous Renfield. Much of Mina's relationship to gender becomes apparent in the places where this role is superseded by other traits that are ascribed to femininity. A very, very important example of this is in Van Helsing's speech about Mina. He describes her as having man's brain and woman's heart. The implication is that Mina's intelligence, her achievements, who she is as a person, none of this is as important as the love she can give to those around her, or as the weakness of her female heart. She is worth protecting, not because of who she is, but because of her value to men. In this way, we see how Mina's masculine traits do not disqualify her from being a woman. No matter what she does, she is still a woman in the eyes of the men around her and in the eyes of the story. Even after her horrific corruption at the hands of Dracula, she is held up as something to protect, something sacred. This is in pretty sharp contrast to how Linton and Gulchenroos are depicted in their respective stories. Whereas Mina's gender nonconforming traits do not exclude her from womanhood, Linton and Gulchenroos's distinctly do exclude them from being men. As discussed earlier, Linton and Gulchenroos are not quite men entirely. They are boys, perhaps, or something else, possibly. And this is what makes them abject. They are between the buckets of man and not man. This objection is not present in Mina's character. The characteristics she possesses that seem contradictory are made to be congruous under the umbrella of womanhood. Her masculine traits are either in service of her being a woman, or they're things she shouldn't be allowed to do. She's a woman, and nothing really can change this. It's something that is forced upon people who society deems to be women, whereas being a man is something that is really readily taken away if someone doesn't meet the standards determined for being a man. The Gothic, a genre built on using horror to understand societal conventions, is very much a good place to explore these ideas.
Fuck! We forgot to record an outro. If you give us, what's an unrealistic number? 5,000 subscribers, we'll make a video about Heathcliff's race. Bye!